Hello, good evening. Welcome to The Late Show. Now, tonight's show is very unusual because we're going to be dealing with a very important topic. And the title of this particular program is The Questionable Death Toll in Gaza. And this is being produced by Nathan, our gentleman in the back there, who's also vision mixing and doing a million other things at the same time as anyone would do unless they work for the BBC. And I have to say this because we're all wearing many hats. Tim Vince is with me tonight as well. Thank God for that. I'll tell you why, Tim. Because I haven't had the time to go through all of these notes.
Not all of them.
Not all.
Some of them.
Yeah, some of them, hopefully. Because in my daytime job, I wear the hat of editing programs. Yeah. So I have to do all of that and produce.
No, you're doing really well.
Oh, thank you.
I don't want to hold it against you.
Okay.
Just to say that Nathan would want you to say that he's taken this from a very detailed report published by the Henry Jackson Society, authored by Andrew Fox, analysing the death toll from the Hamas-run Ministry of Health in Gaza. I'm not sure if there are any other TV stations, Christian or otherwise, who are digging into this.
Yes, and this is
a passing reference.
Right, and I've got to preface this with what I've seen myself over the last 30 years when looking at the situation in the Middle East. You've got Israel, and you've got a very tiny nation compared to the Arab nations, which follow a particular religion, and it's usually known as.
Well, it's a religion that's filled with deceit. Is it that one?
There you go. That's the one. Yeah. Okay. So, but generally speaking, without much ado, I would actually say that they're allowed to lie to their enemies.
That's right.
Okay. And whereas
to infidels.
Yes, to infidels. Whereas Christ always says, liars will not inherit the kingdom of God. Maybe they don't know that particular scripture, or they don't abide by anything to do with especially the New Testament. But Christ is not just an ordinary fellow or someone that just popped up in the earth 2,000 years ago and disappeared. He had a history going all the way back to the beginning of creation.
But they always say in war, Howard, the first casualty is the truth. And they believe they are in a war.
Yes.
So that explains it.
Against the infidels, which is everybody who doesn't believe in the Muslim faith.
In their creed.
And their particular hadith and other writings by Muhammad as well, which are all in the Quran. We've got to call a spade, because otherwise we're going to be going round in circles. And it's so important because unfortunately, what I've come to see, and you have too, over the last 30, 35 years, is a constant bombardment of mistruths. And the reason is, it is to, I suppose, in this case, is to gain sympathy for Hamas and the Palestinian cause.
Yeah, and they are trying to skew the history books. I mean, literally real time.
Yeah.
So, it's difficult enough tracing back through the history, let's say, of the hordes that swept across Africa through into Spain and were stopped at the Battle of Tours. Difficult enough to see when they got to the gates of Vienna in the 16th, 15th, 16th century. Difficult, but they're now doctoring it literally as we speak, and that's why it's really important to clarify what is the research, what is the data.
Yeah, and what you're going to be presented with tonight is some interesting facts and data which have been assembled by other people other than Hamas, because what we're seeing is these particular untruths, if I can call it that, if not lies, are there to misguide people and to bring them to a wrong conclusion with regards to what the situation is.
And I was going to say one other thing, as a kind of a caveat or a warning, is that there have been a lot of lives lost, but the distortion of the breakdown of lives, and it's a tragedy.
Yep.
By the way, it's a tragedy on the Palestinian people.
Absolutely.
But it's definitely down to their deceptive leadership, and the world is complicit with those deceptions, and so they're the victims. But of course, everyone's a victim of false reporting.
Yeah, and obviously there are always collateral damage in civilians in that sense, in any war, but this is made even more pronounced because of the false, if you like, records and the counting, if you like, for taking people who should have been combatants. We've never heard the amount of combatants that have been killed amongst Hamas soldiers, if you can call them that. And they're nowhere, and I think you're going to be a little bit disturbed, hopefully, because of what you're going to be hearing tonight as well.
So just if we crack on, as they say.
Please do.
So on this first segment, we've got three primary data sources. One is hospital records, the other is information sources, like the media, social media and the like, and the other is public submissions by families, notifications. And Google Forms where they can report deaths. Now the point is, the key thing is, what are they putting in the data? Are they putting in all deaths? In other words, is there a comparison between what would naturally happen? Is that we have the same thing during COVID, by the way, COVID reporting. But, are we measuring it as all the deaths are due to the war, or are we taking out to those where people would die naturally? And then secondly, the breakdown between, the women, the ages and the proportions. And that's where it's so dangerous. So we have one case study. There's a guy who was 31 years old, and he was put down as a baby in the records. I don't read Arabic, Howard, but this, this guy who's gone through this report, Andrew Fox, he's digging into the data, and you can see there a man on going into the data. He was identified as an infant named Mahmoud Fahid Sakhari, Al-Fahna or something. Now that's one. Now, of course, if you dig in the data and you start to see a pattern, then you can extrapolate, as any statistician would do. And we have another, so that's misclassification of gender and age. The second one is we have a table showing the male names reported as female. So that's quite incendiary, because it's basically saying that, Israel's targeting women and children, you see? So on those 2 points alone, going in detail on what the Ministry of Health in Gaza is saying, it's inconsistent. And then it starts setting off alarm bells. Now, what happened in November, on the 11th of November, so we're only talking about just over a month after the massacre on October the 7th, they stopped using this so-called system that they had. And we're talking about all the northern Gaza hospitals, because if you remember, it started in the north, Israel moving in. By the way, they did delay quite a lot before going in. But so you've got the Indonesian, the Kamal Adwan and the Al-Shifa hospital. They stopped using the system. And then early 2024, the Al-Aqsa hospital and the Nasser hospital, these are big hospitals, they stopped using it. So if we look at the third case study, this is the Ministry of Health flagging that the data may not be accurate and announcing that many may not be registered. Well, what that does is, because they then moved on to putting in the data manually. So you tell me whether, Hamas are going to have their fingerprints on that data. So the automatic systems dispense with, or whatever system they had, and people start entering the data.
Yeah. Well, if Hamas had anything to do with it, they would put fear of God up of anybody and probably threaten them if they didn't comply. Totally. I'm talking about their own people, because this is what Hamas does to their own people, is throw them off the tops of buildings and also shoot them and do other things, especially if they're reaching for food. They will shoot somebody. Yeah, so it's a totalitarian, regime ruled by fear. So the next case study, so this is now, the network was restored in February 2024, and they made corrections, in inverted commas, to earlier
errors in identity numbers and dates. So it's a little bit like Harold Shipman. Do you remember him? He
Yes.
murdered about 60 people. Well, he was doctoring his own records, but unfortunately, he left a date stamp in his computer. So that's how his whole, scheme fell apart. But, people took at face value what he wrote in there. And then next case study is 23-year-old man is put down as a 4-year-old, and then he's changed again to be a 23-year-old. So I think one error, as Lady Bracknell would say, is unfortunate, but two is carelessness.
Yes. And I think we're going to see by the end of this report, there are many false reports.
Exactly, because actually, eventually, people, if there are honest statisticians out there, they will, because the saying about lies.
Go on.
Darned lies, I won't swear.
Right.
Statistics.
Right.
So that, in other words, it's another level of lying. But anyway, point is, we're now going into the contradictions. So the Director of Health Information Centre claimed the ministry does not rely on media for data, but this was contradicted by the ministry's own report. So you remember what I said at the beginning? Mm-hmm. They source their information from the media. If that isn't circular,
especially if it was the BBC,
it's just circular. It's incestuous reporting. The BBC are reporting from Hamas, who are getting their data from the BBC. As an example,
right? So never.
For instance, and people, just so people don't say, "Oh, well, you could be sued by the BBC." Jeremy Bowen made exaggerated reports when that hospital, I think it was the Al Shifa, was rocketed, obviously. And said that there's been a massacre there by Israel. Implication when number one, it wasn't a massacre. Number two, it was from their own Islamic Jihad rocket.
Yeah. Yep.
But if we just have, I don't know. Sorry, I was looking down, but this is the hospital numbers. We've got that were approved according to the latest data. I think I've already mentioned that. And then, of course, they used the term martyrs. The number of martyrs was no less than 4,143 as of the 11th of December.
2 months after. Oh, 1 month. 1 month.
So this is media reporting, Gaza Ministry of Health emergency report, and the highlights that's on there is not in the original. I hope folk actually will watch, if they can bear to watch this again, and really
take it all in. Yeah,
take it all in. The next one is the emergency reports. I'm not sure whether I'm case study 6 here or 7.
That was the 11th, so 7, I think.
But this is the 29th of Feb now, 2024. Yeah. So, this is what they're saying, reliable media sources. This is what I mean, it's incestuous. They're reporting on stuff that they've already fed to the Ministry of Health. And by the way, some of the people on the ground, so-called reporters on the ground, are working for Hamas.
Now, which Ministry of Health are we talking about when we keep referring to this?
Yeah, it is the Gaza so-called Ministry of Health. Well, it's a terrorist organisation, so they always big up the status of Hamas, call it the Ministry of Health. They always used to call, by the way, I remember Andrew Marr, when Tony Blair visited Israel as Prime Minister, he called Sharon General Sharon. So he looks militaristic. And he called Arafat President Arafat. You see what the subliminal messages? They're respectable, Israel's a terrorist country.
As far as they're concerned.
And then, so no clear guidelines provided on what qualifies as a reliable source. So, in other words, that's, the coach and horses can be ridden through that definition. And then by December 2023, 45% of fatalities were attributed to these media reports, according to the ministry's own statement. So that, of course, has quite an impact on the overall figures. January 2024, the Ministry of Health launched a Google form for families to report martyrs or missing persons, and that's the form we can see up on the screen there. Now, this became a key method for collecting fatality data as hospital systems collapsed. By the way, I feel wounded just reading the term fatality data. It's upsetting, isn't it? people are dying.
Yes,
And
I
it's
mean, we're
being
talking...
manipulated.
Yeah,
so it's disrespectful for those that have died.
absolutely, and often is the case, is there... I say innocent people, innocent Palestinians who have no choice,
Yeah.
and they're being manipulated by Hamas to actually conform to whatever it is their wishes and wants are. They're very selfish. They will put themselves above all the others. They see them as cannon fodder.
Yeah.
Really.
So the distinctions where they're blurring the lines is gender, we've mentioned that, age, we've mentioned that. The other one is whether they are combatants or civilians.
Yes.
So any combatant, they're shoveling those, literally shoveling them indiscriminately into the other category.
Now, whatever the volume, or if you like, the figures are for those that have died in Gaza, no one has ever mentioned, really, along the line, that there are 16,000 of those are Hamas soldiers.
That's right. That's right. Actually, Joe writes that this is just a very short email. This is the truth about Gaza. So there's 17,000 terrorists killed, 5,000 civilian.
Yeah.
It's very sad regarding the civilians, but the rest is lies.
Yes.
So case study 8, if we haven't already covered it, it's what I've just said. They're not distinguishing between civilians or militants. The Gaza judiciary, sounds very official.
Which is controlled by Hamas.
Yeah, reviewed only a fraction of the submissions, raising questions about impartiality. So, in other words, they're questioning these, civilians who are notifying deaths. People from a family will fill out the Google form and...
But it's controlled by Hamas.
Talk about the
not
pot calling the
independent.
kettle black. They're saying, oh no, they're not impartial, but we're impartial. So this is what we're up against. And then there's one other on the incomplete data. So I don't know whether we're building a picture, but it seems that it's not very reliable.
Yeah.
The Ministry of Health
Well,
data.
because the missing data like identity numbers, birth dates, which should be included in fatalities, but they're not. They're mixed up somehow.
Yeah.
And the entries without the dates of death were considered complete.
Yeah.
How could you do that, despite lacking critical information?
So, and again, on the family-reported fatalities, they had a higher proportion of fighting age men, 62%. Well, the Hamas, Ministry of whatever propaganda wouldn't be very happy about that. So they would try and suppress that.
That is the truth.
Yeah. And then on other demographic breakdown of different family record sources, that's case study 9 on our list. Now I like graphs, Howard. I'm trying to read through a whole lot of text, but this is telling us the difference between hospital registered family notifications and what the judicial committee, who's impartial, what they say. But there, I just said it, 62% are men. This is family notification. The hospital says 42% were men. So who do we trust on those three? I think it could be even higher than all of those, but I would possibly trust the family to put their information out there, and I wouldn't trust the media sources. Now this is dramatic changes, okay? So the Al-Aqsa Hospital, it's just one hospital. That graph was showing all hospitals, but they suddenly jumped their fatalities from 4,994
to 6,608
a week.
In a week.
So that's like, well, let's just think of a number.
Well, with children accounting to 52% of the increase.
Yeah. Howard, this is all with the backcloth of what we're seeing, probably hundreds of thousands in Syria being tortured and buried and in mass graves. And they're trying to accuse Israel in a war situation and falsely accuse them of targeting civilians. Yeah. So that's our first segment. I don't know how well we're doing on our timeline for the show.
Yeah, good.
The second one is digging into more detail of the overrepresentation of women, and we have and children. So we have a case study of in fact, this one I mentioned, of a 31-year-old baby. It sounds a little bit like, you know, it sounds a little bit like the Day of the Jackal, because he went round the graves to try and find a false name. If anyone remembers that film with Edward Fox. Yeah, that's fine. So the table shows the steady increase in the proportion of women and children killed, reaching an implausibly high 74%. So what they were doing, Howard, was they're thinking, right, we want to show that each week women and children, so this is the stupidity of people doctoring the thing. So it's just such a steady graph. And I remember when even the mainstream media was saying this doesn't look right, because statistics doesn't work like that in wartime, this steady increase. And the problem with the steady increase was it reached an implausibly high 74%.
74%, yeah.
And then they said, oops, and then they have to change it.
And that was by the 5th of December 2023.
Yeah. So what it was saying, if this is accepted as correct, males made up 26% of fatalities, because of course they haven't got anyone out there fighting. You know, they're helplessly waiting for Israel to bomb them. Yeah. That's the impression it gives.
I suppose then with, you know, so the press, you know, the press from other countries not being allowed in there doesn't help, does it?
No, it doesn't help. But funnily enough, they do have connections. They were, by the way, not so much not allowed. I don't think their organizations would want them in the danger zone, but they do have like pseudo reporters, often, you know, who are breathed on by Hamas. So here we have now the population pyramid of fatalities by age and sex. So this is, I'm just literally reading it off the fly, but what you can see is that they've boxed around the high number of men between that are basically fighting age. So if you look at how that graph on the blue side, Howard, you know, spikes, that at least is showing that the men who are dying are fighting age. In other words, they're combatants.
Yes.
It's obvious, isn't it?
Got you, yeah.
Okay, the next one is the proportion of, I'm not sure which graph is coming up next. There's 3 graphs. One is the one we've shown about age and sex. The other one is, this is an interesting one, because this is females versus males, and you can see, of course, that the males are higher, and this is from the hospital records. But when we get to, of course, at the higher age group, people are dying naturally. But are they reporting them as dying naturally, or just part of the overall figures? And that is the big question mark.
And I suppose something else, which I personally have not seen the facts or any stats on, is the people that are starving to death.
Yeah.
Because most of the people that I see are quite plump, if I may say.
Yeah, but what a media report it is, that Israel's stopping them being fed. And we did see, you know, when they did allow us to see footage, you could see that Hamas were taking the food. Yeah. So whatever Israel was sending in, and quite rightly, they're saying, why do we want to feed the opposing army? Okay, so we've gone through some of the hospital records, but I'll just read a few of these points. Deaths are reported through hospital records and family notifications. The spike in the male fatalities, family reported deaths show a significant increase in male fatalities aged 15 to 50, so that's fighting age. Noticeable peak is seen between 25 and 40 compared to the other demographics. So that's the graph that I think I showed you earlier. The only thing that I'm just trying to check is that from the hospital, or is that the overall Ministry of Health statistics? Is it? Oh, it's their Central Bureau of Statistics.
Okay.
Well, I think we've already got the message that then we can't trust the figures.
Yeah. But again, I'm just trying to keep up with you here. As I said earlier, I wasn't in time to actually study this myself. So what page are we on? So
we are
on the same page.
The second page of 2.
Second page.
We've got 7 different packs here. Can you believe it?
Yeah.
And
I know, it's amazing.
We did pray beforehand.
Yeah.
So we trust the Lord's going to lead us on this.
Go on. Good.
This is from Andrew, Dr. Andrew McHutcheon. Thank you for presenting data about the deaths in Gaza. The failed Palestinian Islamic Jihad missile fell in the grounds of the Al-Ahia, that's right, Al-Hi hospital, not the other hospital name you said. Correct, I wasn't quite sure. It was previously known as the Gaza Baptist Hospital. I was there for 8 weeks in the spring of 1977 as a final year medical student on elective study and remember the layout of the site clearly. Google shows not much change. There is a cemetery across the road on the west side of the hospital campus, and that is where Palestinian Islamic Jihad launched their missiles. And by the way, we saw the footage, if you remember, Howard. We actually saw, BBC Verified could see where that missile was coming from. It wasn't coming from Israel. And so Andrew is saying, Hamas claimed this is a doctor who worked at the hospital. Hamas claimed 500 dead. It is highly unlikely that so many could be in a building that has a capacity of 80 patients. So Howard, this is from someone who worked in the hospital. This is just one little isolated example of distortion. If you extrapolated that over the whole of Gaza, you can see there's something a bit fishy going on. So the maximum capacity of the hospital is 80, and Hamas claimed 500 dead, and that went around the world and caused riots and demos around the world. It makes you cry, actually.
Thank you for writing.
Thank you so much for that.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Okay, so what do you want to take on?
No, I'm just trying to catch up with you.
Okay, so I'm still on 2 because I'm a bit slow considering we've got 7. Okay, so if we look at case study 5, the fatalities by source, age and sex as a proportion of each. I think if we can hold this on the screen just so that we can get a grasp of it. The male fatalities as a percentage of hospital records is that first one, and the female one is lower down. All I can see is that there is, what you would expect is an increase of male fatalities within that age range. So this is from the Ministry of Health again, the fatality list. What I find, Howard, is you need to dig into the data. You've got a pattern there, but can we really trust it? Because they were literally going with a marker pen and trying to make it look credible. Whereas why am I saying statisticians?
Statistics.
Statisticians. No.
As a person who comes up with all the figures.
Anyway, just that's helpful. Now, in our graph case study 6, 70% of 19-year-olds was revised to 18-year-olds. So you can see they're just sort of thinking of a number and saying, well, that looks a bit better, let's put that in. It's a bit like when I think it's the Allied Irish Bank said how much they wanted from the government, to bail them out during the credit crunch, and they were just laughing and just picked their number out of the sky.
And case study 7, 98% of 18-year-olds were reduced to 17-year-olds.
Yeah.
I mean, why would they do that? I mean, it's not a big deal. It's not such a big deal.
No. It's trying, I think their problem is once, as it were, the dam bursts on the data getting out there, they're trying to play catch up, but it is really like the Keystone Cops or something. They're literally trying to, which you cannot do with data. It eventually shows up. It's like in someone's accounts when they're audited.
Yeah, but with all due respect, there isn't, a year difference in their assessments is not necessarily a huge amount, is it? So that pattern, to say it's inconsistent.
Well, I tell you what is big, is that 90% of them were doctored, Howard. 98% of them were reduced to 17, and 70% of 19-year-olds were reduced revised to 18 to make it look, I don't know what it's telling us apart from the fact that they're doctoring the figures. In fact, can I read the conclusion from Andrew Fox? He just says the pattern of inconsistent age reporting raises doubts about the reliability of child fatality figures cited by the international media. So we're on to 3 now. We're doing, I think, quite.
You're doing well,
actually.
mate. You're very good.
Yeah, it's good.
I'm impressed.
This has got the title of this one is Deaths Unrelated to IDF Action, and undistinguished fatality. Fatality lists do not differentiate deaths caused by accidental or purposeful detonation of explosives. Okay, so it's portrayed as though Israel, these nasty, Jewish fighters are just shooting,
or particularly young people,
and causing. But it's saying, look, it doesn't even differentiate mines or booby traps. While Israel, did Israel go into Gaza, into a war zone, and plant mines and booby traps? I don't think so.
So a lot of this could be then down to Hamas actions. Is that what
and they also don't separate fatalities caused by Hamas preventing evacuations or targeting aid distribution, which we mentioned earlier. And so then excluded causes of death, non-hostility related deaths such as accidents or criminal activity, i.e. clan violence, are included without distinction. Examples include incidents like trampling deaths during aid riots in February 2024, which we did see, and violence against activists. It does cast a bit of a shadow over South Africa, putting up this criminal case against Israel and against Netanyahu, when the evidence is so dodgy.
Absolutely.
Talk about a dodgy dossier.
They would have to be there in person, really. You'd have to have inspectors or people that would be able to assess what's being said as being viable and truthful, before they make such a statement.
There was even shootings there at the aid. Just reading a couple more of our emails. Thank you very much, everyone who is, bearing with us and even writing in. By the way, this is what Bob says. The Russian general assassinated in Moscow had been exposing evidence the US government and oligarchs created COVID-19 and the mRNA injection to make trillions for pharmaceutical companies. Didn't know that. This is from Stefan. By the way, we're not a news channel, Howard, so we're reading out emails. We don't have Revelation TV Verify. We're just doing our best.
Yeah.
So Stefan says,
it actually puts an alternative out there, so that it gives an opportunity to just hang on a sec. Don't accept everything that's coming out, especially when Hamas is really the Ministry of Health.
As far as the Henry Jackson societies are concerned, they are one of the most respected think tanks who have operated in Parliament for 20 years, or more. So they're very respected.
Incredible.
So we're not, you and me, we haven't just sat,
and
and sort of wrote something on the back of a fag packet.
Right.
So Stefan says, having grown up with Muslims who lived in peace with their neighbours, have since come across a couple of instances illustrating the evil in religion and deed. I think of this religion, indeed all religion, sorry. One Sunday after church, wandering into W.H. Smith, I came across the Quran. I read a verse calling for the destruction of Israel. That was enough for me to put it down. I quoted this verse to a Muslim Kosovan builder who immediately attempted to tell me otherwise. And then Stefan's second point, a cousin of mine converted to Islam. His behaviour, which was tantamount to deceit, once again conveyed the truth of this religion, Stefan says. So I think he was had an open mind.
Personal testimonies here coming to play and are important.
I think so, because Stefan's basically saying, look, I had an open mind, I started reading about it, and there's something that's not quite right.
Yes.
And we heard of a good friend of ours in Germany whose daughter has married a Muslim and converted, and that's not uncommon. So it's, this is what is happening across Europe in terms of not only the growth of immigration, and as I often say, Howard, it's people who deny the Holocaust largely, who have immigrated, especially into Germany where it's illegal. So it is a major issue.
And what's this case study? Ahmed Shahdad, Halmi Bricken.
Okay, so this is one where this chap was actually killed by Hamas, and but the Ministry of Health's fatality list fails to accurately reflect the circumstances of deaths, inflating figures by including unrelated fatalities and omitting the role of Hamas in these fatalities. So that's a good point to make.
Apparently he was shot in the head by Hamas for getting aid, and because obviously the way that Hamas operates is they take the aid as it comes in and then take what they want and then distribute if there is anything left. I think they sell it as well, so I've heard. I'm not sure for sure, but they shot this young boy in the head.
Next one is failed rocket launches. Research indicates 10 to 20% of rockets fired from Gaza fall within Gaza. Now we're talking about thousands, well, I mean, maybe tens of thousands of rockets. Since October, it says over 9,000 rockets. So I was slightly wrong. Over 9,000 rockets have been fired at Israel. Approximately 1,000 rockets have not even reached Israeli territory. On the 17th of October, now this is the one that we all remember, a Palestinian Islamic jihad rocket misfired and struck the Al-Ahliya hospital, and we have it there with a BBC reporter now admitting that he was wrong. If we just read, we accept that even in the fast-moving situation, it was wrong to speculate in this way. The UK pubcaster, it says, said of its coverage of this incident. By the way, the person who said it was their main reporter. It wasn't just any old reporter. It was Jeremy Bowen.
Yeah, who I tried to get an interview with when I did The Promise in 1999.
Yeah.
When I told him it was, what it was about, whose land was it? Was it belonged to the Jews, the Christians, or the Arabs, or the Palestinians?
Yeah, and he wouldn't.
He didn't want to be involved in that. He didn't even know what I was going to ask him. So
but it's a little bit like the way we analyse the data here, the Henry Jackson Society. You find these anomalies, and when you hear of that with Jeremy Bowen, senior international reporter, and then you put that in the pattern of BBC reporting, that is why they have been described as institutionally anti-Semitic. And I believe that's a fair description when you look at the pattern.
From when I visited there as well, there is a fair amount of Muslims that actually worked there. And I believe that they also, it was a Muslim who's in the head of religious broadcasting, including the Church of England broadcasts. It's a Muslim who heads up the department.
Oh, yeah, he is.
Guess what? I wonder how much really of the truth from a biblical point of view actually comes out.
Well, yesterday he was claiming, literally, I watched it on BBC News 24, he was claiming the scalp of the former Archbishop of Canterbury, who resigned from even being a priest. What a tragedy, I would say, for such an eminent man to have his nose rubbed in it just because he's trying to manage a large institution where there are some absolute scallywags. But for him to be shamed and humiliated at 89 years old, that was yesterday, and I saw it on the BBC, and this head of religious broadcasting is basically saying that was our investigation that caused his downfall. Well, I'd like to see a little bit more investigation on the other side, to say the least. Okay, so Howard, there's so much information, but we can keep going.
Yeah, just keep going as best you can, because there's so much here that needs to come out.
Pre-war deaths, the average annual natural death toll in Gaza is approximately 5,014, equating to a monthly rate of 418. Well, that's all been sort of swept into the figures. The natural deaths during the war, it's estimated there have been over 5,000 natural deaths unrelated to the conflict, again swept into the figures. An inflation of war fatality numbers, we have mentioned that. And I'm not sure what we've shown up on the screen. Cancer patients recorded as war fatalities. Howard, I'm sorry to say, and I know it's controversial, but during COVID, there were people who were dying that were ticked off as COVID.
Yes, because it was easier. We're talking about
easier,
it here in the
disputed,
UK.
and I know I have friends whose family members were died, and they died, and they always the easiest solution is just put it down as COVID, and it inflated the figures. So this is a case study 4, where we have Yusuf Mohammed Mabruk Abu Kusa. And the point about it was that he was listed as a patient with a right lung upper lobe carcinoma and liver metastases, or whatever they pronounce it. And he's listed as a fatality of the war, by which they mean, Israeli strike. Mm-hmm. And then finally, on this segment, Abir Mohammed Abu Garben, he had multiple myeloma, and he is there in the list more than 3 weeks earlier.
Yeah.
Go on.
Well, just let me read this note at the bottom here, just to conclude this segment, as it were. All 3 of these people that you've just mentioned were apparently alive in middle of April when their names were included in the medical treatment list. So the inclusion of their names in the March fatality list is an obvious error. This is a small sample, but corroborates the wider patterns of fabrication identified in this report.
So they basically were marked off as dead before they died. A bit like Mark Twain. He said, "Rumours of my death are somewhat exaggerated." But and it's also, I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but Building 7 on 9/11 was announced by Philip Hayton. I actually watched it, that it collapsed, when behind the reporter who was reporting on its collapse, it was still standing.
Yes.
That was before
Sounds like
AI.
other things. Yeah, it was
a bit suspect, Building 7. Anyway, we're on our number 4 segment. IDF-reported militant deaths. They've estimated there were 40,000 or more. I don't know if you got the information. January 2024.
Mm-hmm. The intelligence estimated 8,000 to 12,000 combatants killed, 20 to 30% of Hamas forces. But then you got May 2024. US intelligence revised the estimate of 12,000 to 14,000 combatants killed. That's 30 to 35% of Hamas forces. Yeah. The current IDF estimate, 17,000 to 20,000 militants killed, with 10,000 identified by name. And this corroboration, so-called by third parties, as well, is listed here.
Yeah. So, and without going, we're running out of time, so I'm going to go on to number 5, which is now the reliability of Hamas fatality data in previous conflicts. And one of them was December 2008 to January 2009. Hamas reported 1,300 total fatalities with only 48 combatants, Howard.
Oh, that's ridiculous.
95% civilian casualties. So again, if that's their pattern, you can just chuck all of their statistics in the bin, I think.
Yeah. So I wonder when and how they will actually be able to number the amount of combatants that actually were killed.
How?
Because I don't know. This is it. Is it ever going to be? But you've got to have some.
You've got to have some, and
quite a number as well, because Israel was quite thorough.
Yeah, so I would be inclined to trust what Israel have said, that they know these militants by name. So you know that they have taken that they were militants. They actually know them by name. Just think about how many they released from Israeli prisons. They know them by name.
Yeah. They probably have ways of identifying them as well.
Yeah. So, and then again, after the IDF investigated that same war in December, I mean, that was basically just 2 months. They identified 1,166 fatalities, of which 709 were Hamas fighters. So you're talking about 80% there.
And then in November 2009, Hamas admitted that 600 to 700 of its fighters were killed during the conflict, aligning with IDF figures. This is what is covered by the media.
Because they're in a media war. They're in an information war. But when it's all over, okay, sorry, you were right all along. And that,
which
I
has proved to be the
same.
case many times throughout the history of those that are anti-Israel.
And by the way, this is what really gets at my craw, and that is that Haaretz, they are a left wing. They're not a right wing media in Israel. They reported this fact that Hamas admitted that the IDF figures were correct, but the English-speaking mainstream media ignored it.
Yeah,
that's just wicked. We say, how would we say, this religion that we don't mention, is deceitful. But what about all these Western media outlets? They're as deceitful.
Yeah, I don't know. It just seems to be that it's so easy to blame the Jews.
That's it. Exactly. That's it. Exactly. Another war that was in, it was called Operation Protective Edge, July to August 2014. Gaza Ministry published daily fatality lists, including limited names, ages and circumstances of death. But by August, so that was in July, by August 2014, they stopped releasing fatality lists, and retrospective lists compiled later often lacked names identifying details and circumstances of death. In other ways, they're trying to manipulate the data, and if the data isn't what they want to propagandize, they'll ditch it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Again, claimed fatalities, 2,131, and they say of that, 70% were civilians. And that's according to the UN OCHA, which I'm not quite sure that one, but I do know about UNRWA.
And I suppose it's under counting of combatants and the fatalities.
That's
the lack of detailed report, could just bring
the overall numbers are correct, roughly correct. So that's our next point, and the conclusion is the IDF analysis of those two we just mentioned highlights the inconsistencies in Hamas reporting. By the way, I find this a really polite report. I mean, they're just saying, there's no real edge to it.
In any way.
Yeah, it's not filled with animus. Yeah. So again, international misrepresentation of combatants as civilians. And this, I think, is more sinister, if you want my view, and this is what helps to fuel the whole fire. 8 leading outlets, CNN, BBC, New York Times, and the like, they have analysed 1,378 articles by these outlets, and they want to ensure that there is a plus or minus 4% confidence interval. It's a little bit statistical, this, but systematic media failures. Only 3% of the articles analysed included combatant fatalities, Howard. This actually did come out in the newspapers this week. I think it was on Monday we talked about this. 3% of the articles talked about the details we're talking about.
Yeah.
Only 3%. 16% mentioned that the health ministry's figures failed to differentiate between combats and civilians. So that's at least 16% of them mentioned it. But just think of that, we're talking about 84% of which are read by billions, millions and billions of people, they're being misrepresented. 98% of the articles relied on the Hamas-controlled sources, 5% cited Israel sources.
So is that...
Doesn't that say it? It says everything.
Yeah.
CNN's, sorry, I could keep boring you to tears, but
No,
CNN's Fareed Zakaria stated 35,000 civilian deaths, failing to account for 10,000 combatants. Conclusion, the global media's reliance on Hamas figures, they rely on Hamas figures and lack critical analysis. They misrepresent combatant deaths, shaping misleading narratives about the Gaza conflict. So the key thing is this conclusion, isn't it?
Yeah.
We've got.
Well, that's our whole aim, but it's good that people know that they should be questioning the stats that are coming out of Gaza. And particularly, as I say, when they're in charge of their own destiny, in that sense, they're writing what they want the people to be misled by the figures that they're giving. So whatever.
So exactly, they're misleading. Shall I read a couple more of our emails and texts?
And I've got, go on.
And then you have a look at the conclusion.
Well, I'll just have a look at the conclusion, yeah.
Okay. So this is anonymous. It just says, I heard something on the news today. Someone said that Israel should give Gaza the Iron Dome. How stupid is that?
What else do you want to give them?
Next one is the probable reason they changed the ages of 18 to 17 must be that minors are then counted as children. Yeah, because it's 17. Great for propaganda. This is from Kathleen. I put, you're apologising for something that you wrote earlier. You put evil God, that's right, but I didn't read that. It was a mistake. When the BBC showed something like 10 or more 17 to 20-year-olds refugees are Muslims, they said they were children, so they think the English recognise them as children. That's from Mr. M. In other words, they are selective. They'll say that the migrants are children. I think that's what you're saying. But the point is that they are counting also these 18-year-olds as 17-year-olds. I think that's it, Howard. So what have we got on the conclusions?
Well, you've got, says, our investigation into the Hamas-run Gaza Ministry of Health fatality reports during the conflict reveals widespread inaccuracies and distortion in the data and the collection process.
We take it in turns reading these paragraphs.
Yeah.
So I'll read the second paragraph. These distortions primarily result from flawed methodologies, including reliance on media reports and incomplete family submissions, and the inclusion of non-conflict related deaths such as natural causes and accidental fatalities. The Ministry of Health, operated under Hamas, the perpetrators of the 7th of October massacre in Israel, has systematically inflated the death toll by failing to distinguish between civilian and combatant deaths, over-reporting fatalities among women and children, even including individuals who died before the conflict began.
Yeah, this distortion of data or data not only creates a misleading picture of the conflict, but also raises significant concerns about the credibility of the numbers being reported across the world.
The global media's uncritical acceptance and dissemination of these unreliable figures has compounded the issue, shaping public opinion and international discourse on the conflict in ways that may not reflect the reality on the ground. An understatement. Many media outlets fail to scrutinise the sources of the fatality data, often presenting the Ministry of Health figures as authoritative without question.
Yeah, and this has led to a narrative where the IDF is portrayed as disproportionately targeting civilians, while the actual numbers suggest a significant proportion of the dead are combatants. The lack of transparency and clear attempts to inflate the civilian death toll further erode the credibility of the reporting.
And then Andrew Fox says, our investigation found numerous statistical anomalies in the Ministry of Health fatality lists, including significant daily increases in the reported deaths of women and children that are mathematically impossible. Furthermore, the inclusion of natural deaths in war-related fatality counts, the erroneous categorization of men as women and children, and the failure to account for deaths caused by internal Palestinian violence or misfired rockets from Gaza have all contributed to inflated and misleading numbers. You've got a long para here, Howard.
Yeah, this report highlights the broader implications of such data distortion. International humanitarian law requires that warring parties take measures to minimize civilian harm, but the distortion of fatalities or that data undermines efforts to assess compliance with these laws. The absence of credible data also hampers international responses, i.e. humanitarian aid efforts and peace negotiations, etc. And without accurate and reliable figures, it becomes nearly impossible to understand the full scope of the conflict's impact or to hold parties accountable for their actions.
Yes, exactly. And I've got the penultimate paragraph here. While it is crucial to acknowledge the suffering and loss of life in Gaza, which we did at the beginning, the uncritical repetition of unverified fatality figures serves to obscure the truth rather than illuminate it. The Ministry of Health's fatality reports in their current form should not be treated as definitive, nor should they be used as the primary basis for international discourse on the conflict. We've mentioned that. especially these legal cases. The situation calls for a more measured approach in reporting and analysis, one that critically examines sources of information and distinguishes between legitimate and manipulated data.
Final paragraph. The responsible reporting requires more than simply relaying numbers. It demands a critical assessment of the data and an understanding of the context and the commitment to accuracy. Important. The international media plays a crucial role in shaping global perceptions of the conflict, and I think that's where we all play a part from whatever side we're looking at it from. Only by approaching these figures with a critical eye can the media help uncover the truth behind the war's human cost, ensuring that the true nature of the conflict is represented in the international arena. Yeah.
Howard, well done.
We got it.
I mean, it's really an epic report.
Well, Nathan.
By the way, the Henry Jackson Society have the full report, and you can see it there on the screen, www.henryjacksonsociety.org. And if you wanted to go and dig into the details, I would say they are being incredibly polite about what I would call downright wickedness. And it has. The only reason we have to use this language is because no one's listening. The BBC should be, actually giving all the coverage they've given to the distorted reports. They should give an equal coverage to corrections.
Yeah. Well, that's only fair if, to assess the truth. But really, how do you identify the truth? The only one that really knows what's going on is the Lord himself, who sees everywhere. I mean, do you remember the scripture and in Ezekiel, I think it is, with the eyes, the wheel of eyes that goes across the world, you know?
By the way, Dr. Andrew has just written again, and just regarding the Iron Dome, he says it's a complex radar and control system that requires continuous electrical power. Each interception requires a precise control with consumable costs of about $50,000 per missile.
Yeah.
So it's a massive undertaking.
Yeah, I mean, even Iran doesn't want to go to that expense, I don't think, and they've got all the oil. I mean, it's quite ironic that the technology lies in the hands of Israel. And because of the way in which God blessed them, in the beginning, to have wise and witty, ways in which to deal with life and to give them everything possible. He who blesses Israel will be blessed. He who curses Israel will end up in a lot of trouble. And lies will not get you into the kingdom of God. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Nathan, and all of you.